Welcome to episode number 11 of the Apostate Alliance with your hosts, Fay Rahman and myself, John Petersen. Fay the Most Gracious, as she's known on YouTube, Rotten Fire, as she's known on Twitter.
Shilling is meant for the end of the show, John.
Right. So we're joined today by Malik Lendell, who first and foremost would identify himself as a humanist. He is an atheist, and we talked a little bit before the show. And when he was younger, he was raised as a Christian, and then at some point he did look into the Muslim religion, but would have never identified as a Muslim. But I'll let him tell you all about that when we get to the interview portion. Just want to start out by saying that a week from today, we're going to be joined by an ex-Scientologist, Chris Shelton, and that should be a very interesting episode. We're stepping away, from ex-Muslimhood for that episode, and I've never talked to an ex-Scientologist, and forgive me for saying, but it seems like one of the craziest religions I've ever heard of. Some of their stories, but.
Well, I think it sounds crazy. Like I was watching a Bill Burr special, and he was like, I think Scientology sounds crazy because it's new. Whereas if it had like the age and the following of Christianity, it probably wouldn't be as crazy.
Well, yeah. I mean, and the other thing is too, like I've always said, I said, hey, if you're going to have an imagination, boy, them Scientologists, they got an imagination, as far as their backstory, with the alien coming and gathering up souls and dropping them into volcanoes and whatever else the other story. But we'll hear all about that next week. As I often do, I bookmark stories that I see on Twitter, and I saw something this week that I really didn't know anything about, but Faye does. And she says it's more of like an African thing, in Muslim countries. What they do to young girls is, if say a young girl is 12 or getting into her teens or maybe even younger and starts to develop early, they will actually iron the girl's breasts down and bind them, because heaven forbid a man would see something like that. But I'm gonna throw it over to Faye to let her tell us about this, since it's so new to me.
Yeah, so I think the context that we were talking about before the show started was that last week, when we had Nick on, she was talking about FGM, or female genital mutilation, or female circumcision, if we're going to water down terms. We were talking about that, and it is a phenomenon in the Arab/the African world. And unfortunately, there are some passages that validate FGM within the context of Islam. However, with breast ironing and other forms of augmentation that we see, or bodily augmentation that we see in Africa, so like gauges, neck elongation, scarification, tattooing even, some of it is just tribal. As far as I'm aware, there's nothing Islamically grounded about breast ironing, because we have the hijab, which pretty much does the same thing. But in the African subcontinent, as well as the Arab world, there is this real fear that men can't control their sexual urges, and that is why they have things like that, unfortunately.
And Malik, is this anything that you heard about before I brought it up today? Your mic isn't coming through, buddy.
I wasn't familiar with this actually until today.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate to learn these new things, and when you already think that some of humanity is crazy, and then you find out, nope, you haven't heard all the crazy yet. Mm-hmm. There's really no sense in saying too much about this. I will link to the tweet that I found this on, where it links to a story, if anybody wants to read more about this. Let's jump right into talking to Malik, because that's why we're here today, is to hear from my friend that I met on Twitter, met on social media, and now I get to meet him in person today, which is great. me and Fay will, jump back and forth, grilling Malik and asking him questions here. But
it's not going to be grilling. John is trying to scare you.
Yeah,
Before we do jump in with Malik, I did want to say that yesterday I did host CEMB's LGBT event, and it was a really intense thing to host. So I would really appreciate some praise for my excellent moderating skills, because I really thought some people were really going to start fighting in the middle of that, but they didn't. So I just wanted to share that before we jump in with.
And then who was that? That was Miriam, someone that's on Twitter.
Miriam Namazi, yeah.
And I saw that you tweeting about that, and I didn't get a chance to watch any of that yet. But I marked her down as we got to get her on too.
I'll try and peer pressure her into. She's basically my mom now. But I'll try to. She's a very busy woman. I don't know what she's got running right now, but she's very, very busy.
Right.
So yeah.
And so we will link to that in the video description as well. And anything that Malik wants to put in there when we get done, as far as you do have a YouTube channel, don't you, Malik?
Yes, I do have a YouTube. It's not really active though, but I'm trying to get more active. But I do have Twitter.
Right.
Have Twitter, and you can find me on Twitter for sure.
Yep. All right. So, like I said, we talked a little bit before we got started, and take a few minutes here and tell us about, as you were growing up, and you had mentioned the Christianity, and you also had mentioned that you looked into Muslim religion. So, just take a few minutes and give us a thumbnail sketch of what we were talking about before we went live.
So yeah, I was raised sort of within the Christian ideas. Particularly, I don't really know which sect I was actually raised in. I just know I was generally raised with some Christian belief. And I stopped going to the church around 11. That's when my mother also stopped going around that time. And she still sort of held on to a lot of ideas from Christianity. But she was like one of those religious, spiritual, but not religious people who believed in God, but not religion, and she also had sort of this omnist sort of worldview in which she believed every religion was like a way to truth. And I was sort of done with Christianity for other reasons though, because I had this perspective of it. Growing up in a Black community, like a lot of people who do leave tend to, not everyone, but a lot of people tend to think of it as, oh, that's a slave religion, right? That's like a slave owner's religion. So that's where a lot of people are coming from. And that's part of where I was coming from, right? So I remember I was looking at like this thing about the contradictions in the Bible at the time. And I'm like, oh man, why am I believing this? And I remember watching it with my mother, but I guess it didn't have that much of an impact on my mother. And when I saw that really sort of helped set me off, alongside the fact that I was becoming more aware of history and the relationship of what was in the Bible versus what was in history and some of the stuff that seemed to contradict. So basically, at some point, I ended up just not believing anymore. I didn't go to the church, but I still did hold on to this idea of God, right? Mm-hmm. And I was always trying to search for, like, I guess I had this idea that I had to have some sort of religion to know the truth, right? I had to have some sort of religion, and that sort of was, I guess, ingrained in me, especially since especially in the Black community, is a really highly religious community. My family is not my immediate family, but my family as a whole in general is a highly religious family. Like, there's no way you can get around Christianity without it. There's no way you can go to like a family event without Christianity being part of it, right? Or like sometimes if it's not Christianity, it's usually like the general, oh, well, there's God this and God that, it's usually some sort of spirituality, but mostly Christianity. It just was like a big part of my family as a whole, but not my immediate family so much, even though religion did hold a certain position in my immediate family. But later I did start looking into other religions and other spiritual systems. But it was like when I was in, I believe later in high school, might have been in my sophomore year, up to college, I was sort of looking into Islam more casually in the beginning, but a lot more seriously like during my college years. So like, I would say from my freshman year up to the first part of my junior year, which, I mean, now I'm over with my junior year, but it wasn't until then I was like, I can't believe any of this. And I realized I was atheist later. And it wasn't necessarily for me, it wasn't necessarily hard to, I guess it wasn't necessarily hard to come out, but it wasn't because it was more because I didn't realize there would be a lot of sort of sentiment about me coming out as an atheist, particularly from my immediate family. I didn't expect it because I'm like, they're not that religious anyways. They probably won't care. And they did have some sort of feelings about my position, especially since I came from a viewpoint that, like, I wanted other people to see, like, especially when I would say my angry atheist face, right? Where
everyone has one.
Where everyone has one. From a position where I wanted other people to see what I saw, you know? And I also, my main motivation though for that was because I realized how many people got hurt from religion, right? I recognized how many people got hurt from different religious practices. And sometimes I'll look back at my own life and see, well, there were some things that definitely religious belief didn't help me with, and it definitely harmed me in some ways. You know what I'm saying? Like, in sort of like just the way I sort of viewed life, it didn't really help me to truly and fully live the way I want to, right? Mm-hmm. So, like, it wasn't until I studied Islam, though, that I really became atheist, because I guess having those two religious experiences or to compare really helped me question and think about my position on religion more. And
what interested you in Islam?
Well, I would definitely say there's a huge idea that I guess because it's sometimes it's sold as if it's pro-Black religion, right? It's sold as if it's
Bilal is a real figurehead.
Black man's religion and all that. And even though I wasn't associating with like the Nation of Islam, I didn't have really any interest in them. I did still look into Islam because of that, but also because I had many friends in high school who were Muslim. I mean, I have some Muslim family, but like they're not, like, I don't know them like that well, right? And then, so like a lot of my friends were Muslim. So I did look into it because like they helped sort of introduce me to it, but also because I was just already genuinely interested beforehand. Mm-hmm. So it was like I did have exposure to it, like even if it was a more superficial exposure at first. But the more I did research more in college, and that's when I started realizing like it's not all that it was meant to be.
Right. Sorry, so walk me through. So your family, your nuclear family, your immediate family aren't particularly religious. So have you just always sort of had an interest with religion, or so when you started looking into Christianity and found that it's not for you, and then you looked into Islam, like that? I feel like a lot of people don't really have that kind of interest in religion, because religion is one of these like flippant things. Like you go to the church and then you come back home and everything's fine. You know, you throw some rice around, you drink some wine, it's all good. It's just a ritual. So like, how would you say you got interested in actually looking into religion as a whole? Like, what was it about religion that made you interested in it?
I mean, I was raised going to the church, right? So I went to my great grandmother's church at first. It's like this church that's like not 2 hours away, but it's a
far out.
Yeah. And it was it was like I guess I like the experiences that come from religion. That's what I think was the main thing that would hold me to it. And I like the sense of community, right? And I viewed religion as if it had a monopoly on these experiences, right? As if it owned these experiences. And I would look into Islam for the same reason and other religions, but I didn't really look too much into Christianity once I was like, oh, this is a slave owner religion. Take that out of my life, right? But like once I was like, I can't do Christianity, let me look into Islam, right? I was like, that's the next best thing, right?
You were looking for the replacement.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's where my mind was.
Yeah.
Okay. So when you talk about other religious traditions, so you were exposed to Christianity, and then later on you looked into the Muslim religion. Were there any other, religions that you did some research on?
I would say a lot of my other experiences were more like looking into sort of, because I was coming from the position of, oh well, I'm sort of proud of being black, and I was extra pro-black, like to an unreasonable degree, I would say. But like I would,
with your country's track record, I do not blame you. But go on.
But yeah, I would say like because of that, I was looking into like African spirituality and even Native American spirituality. I'm like, okay, let me do this spirituality thing, but I'm like, it didn't really click with me because like it was so far different from what I've previously been exposed to. And Islam was a little bit more similar in some ways, right? But yet it was also still different too. And I think being able to compare, because it was similar in some ways, but also different in others, helped me think about it more. But I would say, yeah, a lot of like African spirituality ideas, especially, was something I was looking into. But I guess what sort of kept me from really going into it was because it just didn't make sense. I couldn't force myself to believe in it. I'm like, I do believe in a God at that point. I did believe in a God, but I didn't believe in all the stuff in those religions. And I'm like, I wasn't exposed to all of these ideas. So I was seeking those sort of religions, but also I would say another big thing wasn't even just religion, but was like, have you heard of, there's a term that some people might not like the term, some people might, I don't know, it's Hotep. So it's basically like someone who's like super woke.
Yeah.
But like they're supposed to be like a pro-black person, but they're doing it to the degree of promoting pseudoscience. So I would say there was definitely a time when I sort of reached into that realm of the of everything, right? And
you're no longer there, so that shows great.
I'm no longer there. So I would say that in a way that is sort of, it does work a lot like religion in that you're essentially stuck, or not stuck, but you're having these expectations of holding like this idea of being super pro-black, even if it means that you're going to forgo logic, right? And for like, I saw some posts the other day. You might have seen it on Twitter about someone saying something about the way mitochondrial DNA works.
Yeah, I did see that, the Black Eve kind of notion.
Right, and it's just ridiculous because
John looks really confused. We might actually need to explain that.
Yeah, you're gonna have to expound.
So basically, someone was explaining or claiming that because mitochondrial DNA they were saying that Black people are able, or Black women particularly, were able to produce all the ethnicity supposedly because of mitochondrial DNA and its variations or something like that. And the issue with that was the fact that mitochondrial DNA has nothing to do with our physical features. It doesn't impact the way we look or any of our traits. It's literally just for the mitochondria. And also like the fact that people look different from like one person is like, well, if we didn't look different from our parents, like we would just, or at least from our other siblings, we would all be identical twins basically in most cases, right?
Yeah.
So they were sharing some pseudoscientific stuff in a way to try to make Black people seem superior. I don't know what it was.
I don't know. I think that there is a lot of, like, especially in this difficult time with the Black Lives Matter movement and this sort of, with identity politics and all of these sort of heavy topics, there's a lot of room for people who are snake oil salesmen to pitch their ideas and see what they can get. I did want to ask you actually that, so you were talking about your attraction to religion and how you weren't just drawn in by the religion itself, but also by community and, you know, the things that you do together. And we've seen throughout history that religion is the kind of thing that binds people, not just in like happy times and sad times, but also angry times. Like you can use religion in ways to like create wars and create divisions. And, you know, even in recent history from where I'm from, the British used religion in order to divide Hindus and Muslims in India. And that's how you have that division there. But and there are also studies to show like that ritual really does bind people, and it doesn't really matter what the ritual involves. As long as everyone takes part in it, it makes people feel more connected. And it is something that we see sort of lacking in irreligious communities. So with like the atheist community or more spiritual communities who like Wiccans and things like that, they're just not taken very seriously. And I wanted to ask, so with Christianity, you felt the connectedness there, but you didn't buy the religion because it's a slave owner's religion. And you started looking into Islam, but what were the things about Islam that sort of switched you off to it? Because I found a lot of people there are a lot of things wrong with Islam, don't get me wrong, but there are some really, really appealing parts of it that people would be like, well, I don't like this, but this is really, really good, so I'm going to go for it. So what were the things that were like absolute deal breakers for you with Islam?
Well, see, I would say definitely reading Anisa, the
fourth chapter.
Because it was just like, how are you going to justify it? And I remember I was reading it with a friend who was they were trying to translate it for me, quote unquote, translate it. But what they were really doing was trying to change the word. They were just changing the words to make it sound softer and more subtle. So it was kind of ridiculous, because I'm like, you shouldn't, if it's not that bad, you shouldn't have to be changing it. They would have said it, right? So I just found it kind of ridiculous. That was one of the issues. But also, like, I think it was also seeing, because I did watch it, like I was watching, getting into the sort of the Dawa channels stuff, right? And I was watching, I think it was, I forgot which channel, but it was like the ones with Muhammad Hijab and then the
like
one with Ali Dawa and them. Yeah.
Sorry, a friend has joined me.
And I just was sort of not finding that to be very productive. They came off as rude generally, and I was trying to see like their reasoning, and then their reasoning was kind of very whack, right?
Yeah.
And another issue that I saw was I kept seeing it touted as compatible with scientific ideas, but every time I would mention a scientific idea or a certain scientific idea that would probably generally be seen as going against Christianity, it also happened to go against Islam too. So I'm like, how can you claim to be scientific when you're literally not claiming certain things that are considered scientific? Right. So
it's real quick. So before we get too far past it. So this person who was translating and, trying to make it sound more palatable to you, did you, after that fact, what did you like go and do your own translation and find out that this person was doing that, or did it kind of come out in the moment that they weren't translating properly?
Well, when I say they were translating, I mean they had the English translation, and then like they were trying to say, oh, what it really means is hit them lightly. It wouldn't
So you're talking about the wife being versed.
Yeah. So it wasn't like they were, this particular person, they weren't necessarily like reading the Arabic and then translating it to me.
Oh, okay.
They were reading the English and saying, well, it actually means this, but this, trying to sort of modify the translation. But I have had someone actually like straight up lie to me about one of the translations. It was the part where it mentions the clot forming man, right? And they basically.
Sorry, I might need to just explain that. So there are verses in the Quran that will that Muslims will claim is like an accurate description of how the embryo forms in the womb, and this has been like a piece of propaganda that has been spread for like above 20 years now. But sorry, go on, continue. Yeah, you were telling a story.
Yeah, so it was just that I remember sharing something about that quote, and among many others about some of what I saw as contradictions about how man was created according to the Quran, a book that's claimed to be scientific, right? And I came to see. I don't remember what I was going to say, but basically, this friend of mine said that they were assuming I was mistranslating and not understanding and just taking stuff out of context. So I provided them with a verse, and they definitely lied to me about what it meant. They were like, "Can you read this?" Trying to check if I could read the Arabic, so they could see if they could lie to me or not, I guess.
Yeah.
And then I presented it, and they told me, instead of saying the clot of blood explanation, right? They said it's mentioning an egg and sperm coming together, and I'm like, I know it does not say that, because I've had someone else translate it for me, and not this person. So it was just really, really offensive to me, because first off, the person was my friend. Like,
it's really insulting, isn't it?
Exactly. And I'm like thinking, at least you don't have to, you can say that maybe you interpret it this way, but don't tell me it says something that it just doesn't say, So
two quick things. One, don't worry about losing your train of thought. I always become tongue-tied and lose my train of thought whenever I'm around Fay too. So, and
between you two and this cat, this is very, very on the spot.
And then the other thing is, I wanted to mention, when you were talking about the verses about being able to beat your wife, that's something I see a whole lot of on Twitter. I see a lot of Muslims on Twitter with these like bending over backwards, reaching, for any excuse they can to justify or to make that sound more palatable. When if you go read it, there's really no question as to what it says. And I see Muslims on Twitter and in videos like saying, well, no, it's it's just a soft hand,
it's
when
just a toothbrush. Yeah,
I mean, and no, so
Jordan would absolutely fucking hate it if you hit him with a toothbrush. Jordan's the cat's name. Continue. Sorry.
Yeah, I just find it really strange, because I guess one of my things about religion was the main reason I never really fully took on a religious identity was because of this idea that I didn't want to claim something and not know everything about it, right? Like, I'm not one of those people who will claim an identity and then try to assume all the beliefs afterwards, right? And that's sort of what's expected, at least with most religions I'm aware of, right? And so I wasn't going to be like, okay, well, let me become Muslim and then read the Quran and then do all this
Yeah,
research.
that's how they get you.
Yeah,
that's how they fucking catch you, and then you can't leave.
Right, and I just find that to be dishonest to myself, because then I'm claiming an identity that I don't actually didn't actually put effort into before claiming that identity, right? So, like, for me, that's why, like, I've explained this to Abdullah Samir on his channel. There's sort of a difference between, like, what I call a prescriptive identity and a descriptive identity, in that a prescriptive one is like you take the label of that identity and then you assume all the beliefs and everything afterwards. And then the prescriptive one, or I already explained that. The descriptive one is the one where it actually is defined by your beliefs. So, like, that's why I generally identify as an atheist, more prominently as a humanist. However, that's more of my values. But I think it's very dishonest to come from the point of view, or maybe not dishonest, but misleading. Yeah,
it is dishonest. It's a form of dishonesty.
Yeah,
but something I had something in my brain and it's gone now. Sorry. What I wanted to ask you is that you do a lot of ex-Muslim activism for someone who isn't an ex-Muslim. And I wanted to know what that is about. Like, how did you get into that? Like, I know you said that you looked into the religion, but I do feel as though, like, especially in this climate of political correctness and making sure that you're not stepping on anybody's toes, and granted, that's all valid. I think that every opinion that exists has its place. What sort of brought you into that kind of activism? Like, for example, when I found out that you were not from a Muslim background, I was actually quite surprised because of how well read you are in Islam. And it's not often that someone takes a genuine interest and then doesn't actually convert and then deconvert. So how did you get into it? Like, what were the influences?
And before you answer, just real quick to add to what she said, you and me went through this. You had overnight DM'd me and had asked me, hey, could you change the video description? I'm not an ex-Muslim. And like I told you before we started, I was assuming that you were, because like Fay said, you're in that community on Twitter all the time, and you are calling out, the horrific things that happen in the Muslim religion. But go ahead and answer, what Fay asked you there.
Yeah, so I would say one of the main things, I think I sort of touched on it before, was just seeing how other people are hurt by religion. Like, that really hurt me, like, to see how it harms other people. And I guess what really bothers me is the idea that people can be persecuted for leaving a religion, or for questioning a religion, or even for being atheists. All things that, like, if I was born in the wrong country, that I would be punished for, right? So coming from that position, it really sort of made me feel like it was necessary to discuss these things. But also, I just felt, because I know I was I know I never really identified as a Muslim. Like, I've studied, I have done a few things, but like nothing where I really would say, oh, I'm part of the religion. But I've never really felt, I just don't feel like I can just be
and I think that's
complacent.
fair. I think that's fair, but it's not really a consent. It was just like a passing curiosity, was that this guy was never a Muslim and he knows like a lot about Islam. So it was just like surprising to me that you weren't an ex-Muslim. Also super interesting. Like, there's nothing wrong with it. But yeah. Another question that I had was, what would you say, like in your time, I don't know how far you went down that rabbit hole of like learning about Islam, but Islam has like a lot of steps to learning about it. So you have the Quran, you have the Hadith, you have like the tafsirs, you have the manhaj, you have like, there's all kinds of Arabic terms that I could go off on right now and not explain, and it would be great. You wouldn't even know if I was making it up, right? There's like a lot with Islam. So what would you think were the weirdest things about Islam, like the most outlandish things that you learned while you were studying it?
I would have to say it's the jinn. It's jinn.
You want to
because
explain
like I wouldn't even say I don't feel like I've gotten super deep into it. I feel like the deepest I've gotten was a lot of the Quran maybe, but like even then some of the Hadith, but that's about it. And it was
you
just
like briefly explain what jinn are for people in the audience who might not know.
So from my understanding, they're supposed to be like these beings that we can't see in our physical world, but they're there, and they were created by God as well. And they're not necessarily demons or not necessarily angels.
They are like a parallel creation to humans in that they still have free will. We just can't see them. I think that's the best way of describing it.
Yeah.
And this is like a mythology that exists within Islam. But continue. Like, what did you learn about the jinn? It's always fun hearing jinn stories.
I just was weirded out by it because even as a Christian, I didn't actually, when I was like temporarily Christianish, I never believed in angels. I just didn't understand it. I thought they were I just thought it was like, oh, this is just a cool little added on part of the story, but I never really believed in them. I just didn't understand why they needed to exist. So I guess I didn't understand the jinns because I'm like, why are we talking about things that we obviously don't see living among us? Like, I just didn't understand that.
I guess because Lucifer in the Quran, or Iblis as he's known in Arabic, is meant to be a jinn, and they just needed like a furthering of that story. Well, I say I think Muhammad needed to explain that. But yeah, the jinn definitely is a weird one, especially since like people now, like if there's anything you can't explain that's happening weird in your house, it's like, oh yeah, that was definitely a jinn. Like say all your prayers and make sure it doesn't possess you, sort of thing. And like the other thing is like this obsession, this like obsessive fear of jinn as well. I don't know if you experienced any of that, but like the sect of Islam that I came from, which was quite you want a handshake now? Like I can't do that. But the sect of Islam that I came from, they had this sort of ritual where you would like say a bunch of prayers and hope that protected you from the jinn. Like we would recite Ayatul Kursi, which is a verse in the Quran, and you would say like 33 different prayers. And it's like really, really extra, like you have to say a prayer outside your house so the jinn don't come in. You have to say a prayer before you eat so they don't eat your food, like that kind of shit. Like I don't know if you ever experienced to that degree, but it's crazy. Like
just real quick to anybody that's just joining us, Fay is not completely crazy. There's a cat in her lap.
There's a cat in my lap. Yeah.
Okay, so
there's a jinn in my lap.
Yeah, I just don't want. I was hoping, we were talking about beings that you can't see, and then all of a sudden you break off and are talking to something that nobody can see, and just wanted to, Randolph Richardson just joined us. He might have popped in and thought, "Wow, it's Fay crazy."
Yeah, Fay's losing it. Sorry, go on, Malik, to have your response to that.
Yeah, so I just was sort of thrown off by the whole concept of jinn because I already didn't really believe in angels or any demons or nothing. And then the explanation I got for them was that they can come into and take control of your body and all that. And I'm like, I'm just like I'm not with it. And I just didn't get it. It was just hard for me to grasp, because there was nothing to grasp, in my opinion. It just seemed ridiculous. I couldn't believe people actually believed that.
Yeah.
Especially in the current age.
Well, I mean, I think it's comparable to, I wouldn't say deities. So there are religions that have multiple deities, but there are like bigger ones and lesser ones. I think it's kind of to the same degree. Not saying it makes any more or less sense, but it's how I would understand it. And then with Christians, Christians also believe in demons and angels and stuff like that. But I guess like when you come from a background where you don't take religion very seriously, you kind of look at it in a more metaphorical way. Whereas like in Islam, the belief in angels and jinn and that kind of stuff is very, very literal. So with Islam, for example, everyone has two angels sitting on their shoulders, recording all of their deeds. One is for good and one is for bad, and it's a literal thing. Like it's not it's not like a metaphor. Like God is always watching. John seems like really weirded out right now.
Because to hear you describe that, the first thing I got in my head is from many a cartoon with the angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other shoulder, arguing back and forth as to what the person should do.
Yeah, I mean, barring the devil, and there's like two angels, and they're sitting on your shoulder, and they're constantly recording everything that you do. They even have names.
So, it sounds like, thus far, like what you've described is when you were younger, you were looking for answers. You were looking for some kind of meaning, and then you discovered, well, God's sakes, this Christianity and this Muslim religion, that's not where the answers are. And so is that what kind of turned you in to looking at humanism? What was it that started you down the path of identifying as a humanist?
Well, I would say I feel like most of my life I was a humanist, but just didn't use that title, right? But I would definitely say the time I started sort of taking on that title or taking on atheist, I mean, it was only like last November when I really considered myself an atheist. But I also started considering myself a humanist because I felt like that applied more to my actual values, which I think are a little bit more important and have more value in connecting with other people over. So like if I find someone who's Christian, but even though I personally don't believe Christianity and humanism or Islam and humanism are compatible, but if you label whatever you believe as Christianity or Islam and somehow it looks like humanism, I will be able to work with you and bond with you over that thing that you title as Christianity or Islam, even though I think it would probably really be better classified as humanism, right? But I think I lost my track, but I value sort of being a humanist first. I started doing so, especially I would say in the beginning, or maybe starting in the summer-ish, a little bit before summer started. I started making that my prominent identity as opposed to just being an atheist, because being an atheist is like, oh, you just don't believe in God, but I want to put out my values first because I think those matter a little bit more.
Yeah, there's more of a connotation of a worldview to humanism, as opposed to that a lot of religious people like to try and say that atheism is a worldview, but there's lots of atheists that have disparate worldviews. It's just, you don't believe in God, atheism. Humanism definitely describes more of your value set for sure.
Exactly.
Yeah. Sorry, I was a little distracted. I did hear everything that you said there. But the one thing that I have found really, really difficult, because for me, the way that I used to live and the way that I live now, completely opposite. Before, I was kind of living like a very 7th century lifestyle with like all of these sort of 21st century amenities. So we had like a TV and a stove and all of that stuff. But other than that, it was very much like the way that we were living was very, very rustic and hipster and not very fun. But then when I moved on and I, left that life behind, I've realized that a lot of people enjoy labeling, which wasn't something that I was a part of. Like this idea of labeling for me was very much like, okay, but why does it matter? Why does it matter what other people think that you are? Like, why do you have to tell people that you are that thing? So for me, labeling has always been difficult. And then there's also to add to that, I was also like very, very invested in literature and language and things like that, and how powerful words can be. And I've always found that if you start labeling things flippantly, it kind of waters down that term. And we've seen that with terms like racist. Like literally anyone can be a racist now, and it holds no bearing. And in some way, it's really, really watered that term down, when I personally don't think it should be. So what sort of made you, like, instead of adopting the term atheist, what made you also adopt the term humanist? Like, what is it about that term that appeals to you?
So I would say with humanism, there are actually values associated with it, and there's actually a worldview associated with it. So like with being an atheist, is just that one just a descriptive word of, well, you just don't believe in a God, right? But that doesn't say much about my values, and I'm not going to necessarily have the same stances on issues as other atheists might, right? So I prefer to put humanists first, because I feel like that's more descriptive of my values as a whole.
Sure.
Pro-human.
Sure.
We have a question here from the audience that would be for
yeah, I've seen quite a few Jin questions.
Yeah,
well,
here's either
well,
one.
I'm left-handed, so I guess I'm possessed and evil, right?
There was a question at some point. Someone asked me what denomination or sect I came from Islam. So I subscribe to the Salafi sect or way of Islam. And I would argue that it's probably the most accurate to 7th century Islam as you can probably get in the modern day. Different people will disagree, and that's fine. But in terms of that kind of literalist interpretation, left-handed people are not possessed, but all of the things that you do for good. So like if you eat, you're meant to eat with your right hand. If you you shake someone's hand, you're meant to stick out your hand. Obviously not the opposite sex, but like if men are shaking hands, they have to use their right hand. If you go somewhere,
even if they're left-handed, they have to use the right hand.
They don't have to, but it's preferred because it would be counted as like a good deed. Whereas if you used your left hand, it wouldn't necessarily be a sin, but you wouldn't get any reward from it. Like the reward and like bad deed system is very, very numerical in Islam. Like everything is counted. I don't know the weight of each deed, but like everything is counted as like good, bad, or like neutral. Like if you enter a mosque, you're meant to enter with your right foot. If you enter a bathroom, you're meant to enter with your left foot. Like it's very, like when I said all encompassing, it's all encompassing. So left-handed people aren't necessarily possessed, but they're not as good as right-handed people.
Wow. You enter a bathroom with your left foot. I mean, that sounds like...
Bathrooms are also the homes of jinn. You have to say a prayer to blind the jinn before you enter the bathroom so they can't see you naked.
I mean, it kind of sounds to me like when you're a kid, step on a crack, break your mother's back.
Literally that, but people actually believe in it.
That's wild. So, Malik, you came to this, decision that first and foremost you're a humanist, and that you do identify as atheist. And as Fay brought up earlier, you are out there in social media and you are, calling out the bad ideas that come from the Muslim religion. Is there anything about your former religion as a Christian? Is there anything about that religion that, really turns you off? I mean, there's some pretty horrific things in the Bible as well.
You don't want to get me started. You do, though, but you don't want to get me started. So first off, Christianity, in my view, at least in my communities, I see all of these churches present in the communities. But what are they doing? These churches looking beautiful and nice, right? In broken communities that don't look that same way. And of course, not every church is, but there are a lot of churches that are well kept, and the communities they're in aren't. And then when you look at the money that comes into these churches, which, I mean, you can't really look into it because of the way the government is set up, where they're not required to share or disclose the amount of money they have. It's just like all of this money is going into these churches, and you don't actually know what they're doing with it. And they're, unlike other nonprofit organizations, they're not required to disclose it. So they might be just giving it to the preacher, which most likely they are, and they're not helping the communities, right? They're not helping the people who are actually in that community. And don't get me wrong, I know there's some churches that do that, but there's definitely way too many that don't, and way too many that only benefit those who are like the preachers and all that. And they preach caring about people and all this, and then you see the communities that they're in, and it's like, do they really care, right? And also, I feel like Christianity, a lot of times, the way it's taught in Black communities particularly is in this way of, you have to be sort of submissive to control, sort of being like giving up your power to other people, and not even to other people, but just to just the forces or whatever, right? People always saying, oh, well, you have to just wait for God to make something happen, right? Instead of making things happen for themselves. Or sometimes it's people sort of not really taking control of their life to the fullest that they can, if it wasn't for them viewing everything from the lens of, oh, well, I can wait because God's going to make the right time for me. No, you have to make the right time for yourself, right? So that's really something that bothers me particularly about Christianity. And I just feel like that's why you might hear me refer to it as like a slave owner religion. I view Islam the same too now, but that's why you view me. That's why I view it as a slave owner religion, because it or slave religion, you could say, because it makes people sort of docile in some ways, right? It forces you to become docile depending on your position. In some positions, like where you use Christianity or use a particular religion to wield power, yes, you can harm people with it, and it can be violent. But in other ways, it can be docile, but not in a good sense, in the sense that it causes people to be totally submissive and just giving their power up to some unknown force, which is basically just the people who have power anyways, who are using Christianity to wield their own sort of influence.
I do think to a greater extent that Islam is a slavery religion. Like, to a greater extent than Christianity. I think a lot of people, especially with Nation of Islam, and I'm glad you brought that up as well, they're under this impression that Islam is like a Black person's religion, because it's ethnic, or it started in an ethnic place, which Christianity also did, but let's not get into that. But Islam comes from the word, like the word Islam means submission. It means submitting to God. And this whole concept of being the slave of God or the servant of God is scattered throughout the whole religion. And we are talking about slavery in like a very metaphorical sense, like God doesn't exist, but it's still a daily, minute by minute accounting of what you do based on the teachings of something else. Like, you have no choice, because you are made to follow this. And if you give into your free will and you go against it, it harms you in some way, be that internally, hellfire after death, whatever. It's still a form of slavery. And then there is obviously the literal slavery that exists in Islam, in owning concubines, buying and freeing slaves, prisoners of war, like all of that kind of stuff. But also the passage that I wanted to share is that one of Muhammad's famous sayings is that this life is a prison for the servant of God. This life is a prison, and this place is only a paradise for people who don't believe. And I mean, that should tell you everything that you need to know about Islam. This whole life that you have is all about servitude to God, all about slavery to God. One of the famous names, like the best name for a baby in Islam, is Abdullah, which means slave of God.
Wow. And just to comment on where you're talking about, Islam is thought of as a black person's religion. And it harkens me back to last week with Nick, because she's white. And I remember part of the conversation we talked about how she was kind of for lack of a better term, like the unicorn of the, Muslim community where she's from. And, people, other parents and stuff were holding her up as, oh, be more like her, But if I hope I didn't interrupt you, Malik, there as far as wanting to comment on what Fay said.
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of touch more on the the Nation of Islam stuff. The Nation of Islam, they're really big in the black community. They do have a lot of influence. They have a little bit of political power even in my city. Not a lot, but they have a little influence, and especially in other bigger cities. But they also do influence sort of the way other people, even if they're not part of the nation, things that they do. Like, I remember I had a friend group that most of them might have been either Christian or just non-religious, but they were like, I think we all stopped eating pork just because of something Elijah Muhammad wrote, and it was kind of ridiculous.
It's a cardinal rule for anyone who wants to be a Muslim outwardly is just don't eat pork.
Right. And see, my friend, she was Christian still, and I wasn't. I just didn't identify as anything at the time, and she was Christian, and I think some of the other people in our friend group, I wasn't really familiar with their religions, but she was saying, yeah, I had to stop eating pork because of what Elijah Muhammad said in his book. And I'm like, oh man, maybe I should stop, because I was like, she knows stuff. She's a smart person. So I was trusting her, who was trusting someone who's obviously not a nutritionist, but what do you do, And so it was like those sort of influences, but you'll also see that a lot in the black community too. A lot more with younger people who just give up certain things or take certain actions because of the Nation of Islam, and also just sort of like the influence they do have in politics does get people to see them more often.
I think that if the Nation of Islam, I'm not here giving them tips, but if they took it a little bit more seriously, Islam is a very easy, because it's so all-encompassing, and this is what it did for me, is it just I didn't have to decide anything. All of my life choices were decided for me, and that's a very, very easy thing to follow if you're a kind of person who just wants to live like that and just essentially just give your life to God. But because the sort of give your life to God life in Islam isn't the same as Christianity, whereas if you give your life to God in Christianity, you become a monk, or you stay in the church all day and all of that. That's not how it works in Islam. You become a more active part of society, for better or worse. You become very, very active. You start preaching on some level. If you really wanted to cause a stir, you could start a war. There are ways to organize people, and I think that Nation of Islam are taking it in the complete wrong direction. If their idea is to section off a part of America, it really does feel like I'm giving them tips. If they really do want to section off a part of America in the name of blackness and have a country for black people, in the United States, they're doing this the whole wrong way. The whole wrong way.
Yeah, I think a lot of what they're trying to do currently is more of getting sort of political influence in Black communities in different cities. So I know there's some people in my city who are like older people, and they're sort of they're getting really involved in the community. I've got a chance to even meet some of these people, but like they're really open about their religion, which I heavily disagree with. Some of the stuff the Nation of Islam says is really questionable.
Oh,
I mean,
mad. Yeah, completely.
And then if you look, have you heard of the Nation of Gods and Earths? I'm familiar with that because a lot of them are influenced by the Nation of Islam. So you get a mix of those in the Black community, and it's really
To ask a question, what are some of the, because I'm aware of it because I used to be a Muslim, but what are some of the crazy stuff that the Nation of Islam put out? Like, what do they talk about? What do they preach? It is a very one-sided, like one race kind of ideology. But, you take the stage. Tell us about it.
I would say, like, I don't know everything about it, obviously, but like, I do know that some of their beliefs, like the story of Yaqub, the supposed reason that white people supposedly exist, which was basically explained as Yaqub went to an island off of Greece. I believe it was Crete.
So Yaqub is the prophet Jacob in the Bible, but people who might not be aware. But he went to this island in Crete.
Went to an island in Crete, and then he supposedly created white people there from albinos. It was a really stupid story. I first heard it from my grandfather. I didn't realize it was something that was part of the Nation of Islam ideology, and I didn't realize that my grandfather, somewhat associated with the Nation of Islam, even though he doesn't, he does like some weird mixture of strange Afrocentric beliefs thing. Sure. But that, I guess that includes Nation of Islam. But yeah, that's one of the weird things. But also the idea of Wallace Fard Muhammad being incarnate of God, God incarnated, right? Yeah. So that's one other thing which goes against most people's views of mainstream Islam, right? And then also the whole thing about, Wallace Fard Muhammad and Elijah Muhammad sort of breaking the finality of Muhammad's being the final prophet, right?
Yeah.
So those were some issues, or some things that are commonly seen as issues or very strange from mainstream Islam.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, I wanted to ask, you said you started out your family Christian, and being part of the Black community, I've found that atheists sometimes have a problem, in their atheism being in the Black community, because most of the Black community is so invested in Christianity. Have you experienced any problems with your fellow Black Americans because of your being an atheist?
I would say I've not in person so much, not too much, at least. I had some issues with family, but generally it's sort of left alone. But I do know other people definitely do, but personally I haven't had too many issues with it, but it's not like I always bring it up to everyone either, at least not in person. And sometimes I have to set those boundaries ahead of time. Like, okay, well, we're not going to discuss religion together because we know that it's going to be divisive.
You would make that distinction.
Right.
And I mean, I can't really speak about Black experience, but what I have found, I used to spend a lot of time with the Somali community. They were really, really close to me. And also we have a very, not conservative, but those Christians that go to church to sing. Mm-hmm. I don't know what you'd call them, but hymn Christians, they go there and they do some singing and they come back. I'm not trying to be offensive, by the way. That's how I see it. But like, I used to work with this lady who was like that kind of Christian, and she was like, "Wait, you don't believe in Jesus?" And I was like, "No." And she was like, "Why did you say it like that?" And she just could not believe that I didn't believe in Jesus. Like she knew that I didn't believe in God, but she could not believe that I didn't believe in Jesus. And I was like, "Well, if I don't believe in God, why would I believe in the Son of God?" And she was like, I don't know. I just thought everyone believed in Jesus. And this woman is like in her 30s and her 40s, you know? Like, I don't know. I think that there is this kind of, because it's so culturally involved, like Christianity is so culturally involved in Black communities especially, sometimes it is just part of the culture. And if you don't take part in it, you're looked at as like other or weird. So I can definitely understand if people were looking at you funny because suddenly, and the other thing she said was like atheism is like the religion of the devil, like that it's the devil's religion.
I never get tired of hearing that myself.
And like for us, it wasn't like, because this is at work as well. For us, it wasn't like a heated discussion. She was just casually saying it, like atheism is the religion of the devil. And I'm saying that, like, if we don't believe in God, you just found out I don't believe in Jesus. You really think I'm subscribing to the devil? And she was like, no, but you don't know it's the religion of the devil. And it's like super insulting, but she meant it in the best possible way she could, given the circumstances and given her foresight. You know, like I think that sometimes we as atheists, we take everything too personally. Like we forget all of the shit that we believed in an instant without applying it to other people. So like I know atheists who will like really be incensed anytime someone says bless you after they sneeze, and they'll like go off on one and give a lecture about it. And it's just like, you know, it's just a reflex. It's just a reflex. You hear someone sneeze and you say bless you.
Yeah.
And with this kind of stuff, when she went, like, because I've been persecuted within my own family and within my community, and to such a huge degree, suddenly her going like, oh yeah, atheism is the religion of the devil, wasn't so fucking bad. It was just like, okay. It was just like, you know, it's just something you say. It's a reflex. And I think that we, as, you know, secular people, as people who are non-religious, and as people who have come out of a system, shouldn't be so mad about it. I don't know. Maybe I'm going off on a tangent, but anyway.
Well, but to add to that though, because it is a very interesting point. You know, there's all those things in your vernacular from the time you were in a religion that, as Fay said, they're just, you know, part of your language, and they just come out, you know, bless you, or, you know, something outrageous happens, you say, oh my God. You know, I've had people who still believe call me out. Oh, you just said, oh my God, you know, it must still be in your mind. There was this question, I think it was on Twitter, it was somewhere on a social platform, where the question went out, if you were with a loved one or a very close friend and they were on their deathbed, and they asked you to pray with them, as an atheist, would you pray with them? And my answer, and a lot of other people's answers, were absolutely. I mean, you know, because how is that going to hurt me?
My question to that person is that, do you love your friend?
Right. Well, yeah, basically.
That's it.
Yeah. I mean, to me, there was no question in it that, of course, I would do that, because I want to show, you know, kindness to my fellow human being. And if this is what they're thinking of moments away from death, then I want to comfort them, you know, even if it was somebody I didn't know, you know, I wouldn't hesitate at all. I mean, how much of a dick would you have to be to say, well, no, I'm an atheist. Yeah, you're dying.
Yeah. How much of a dick would you be to deny a dying person's wish?
Exactly.
It just like it doesn't cost you anything. Maybe your inner integrity, but you can figure that shit afterwards, you know?
Yeah, I agree, because like if it's not going to harm you, like what's the point of not doing it, right? You know, like I don't have an issue with those sort of practices. Like you said earlier, Faye, you mentioned how following sort of rituals are good for us. Like those sort of give us meaning and give us purpose. And I think acknowledging those benefits that we get out of religion are good. And prayer even does have those benefits. Doing, taking, if you have to pray aloud, that does have benefits. It's proven that talking to ourselves and hearing our own voice, and it helps us.
It's a form of meditation. Yes, it's you're sort of, in a very hippy dippy way, expending your energy in the wrong direction, but it's still a way of like sitting with yourself and taking that time out. Like with Muslims, we do it 5 times a day. That's like, at least, if you rushed it, it's like 25 minutes out of your day where you're just sitting with yourself, you know, without thinking about anything else. And I personally think that, you know, introducing rituals, maybe not in a religious sense, but in like a tradition sense, isn't the worst thing in the world. You know, having days where you're like, yeah, let's do, you know, it can be our own personal thing. Let's just go out and, you know, have some drinks, sit around a fire. Like today, not to get too much into it because this live stream is not about me, but
they're always
my friend and I want to start a tradition where we like have a jar where we can put all our negative thoughts in, like we write it down on a piece of paper, and then we have a burning day every year. And, you know, it's not just like symbolic, and ultimately it is stupid. Like, it doesn't mean anything. There is no meaning to it except what we are putting on this. But like, it's a way of just marking a day, socializing, as well as like taking care of yourself. So I think that we, as secular people, should invest a little bit of time into maybe creating our own little rituals so that we can just live less seriously.
Well, and also too is there are, you know, like I'm not one of those atheists, and I don't get that vibe from you where I think that all religion has to be eradicated, because I recognize the fact that for some people, if religion went away tomorrow, that would have a negative effect on some individuals. I mean, they, even as just a, you know, like a personal program of, you know, improving yourself, I mean, or keeping your life on track. There's some people that need religion to, I mean, I always hear like some who say that morals come from Jesus, and that if, and I and other people have often asked, you know, Christians, well, so if there was no God or no Jesus, you would be immoral. And there's been some of them that have said, well, yes, of course. You know, I mean, so, yeah, there's benefits.
I think that people like that, I don't think that they would necessarily be like running around murdering everybody, but I think they have a hard time being accountable for themselves. And I think it's just human condition. Like, it's difficult to sit with yourself and acknowledge, man, I'm fucked up. You know, like what I did or what I said, or, you know, the things that I have done in my life aren't particularly good. And then, you know, weighing the, am I a good person? Am I a bad person on like a very black and white scale is very, very difficult. So I do understand that religion for a lot of people just makes that accountability easy. You know, giving charity, good. Praying, good. Eating food with your family, good. Murdering, bad. You know, like, it's all of that. It's just the political use of it and the integration and the sort of enforcement of it on people who do not want to partake. That's more or less what I have a problem with.
I have to agree, because like I used to be one of those people, like in my angry atheist phase, which sometimes it comes back, but but I do go through this. I do go through this sort of feeling of anger when it does impact politics, right? So I'm very, 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 very against any sort of form of religion in any government, because, like, I know here in the US, we have a lot of people try to push their particular flavor of Christian belief into the government. And it's like, it's really concerning, especially in this current climate, because it's being sort of permitted in some ways.
I mean, I do think that in the US, it's more of a problem. Here in the UK, even though technically we aren't a secular country, we have more or less separated church and state, more or less. There are areas for improvement, certainly, because again, we're not considered a secular state because we are a Church of England country. Thank you, Henry VIII. But you know, the United States, as much as I think a lot of people will say that it is a secular country, a lot of your laws and a lot of your policies are very, very religiously motivated, and I find that very dangerous and concerning. And I don't think I'm alone in that.
Well, and you look at groups like that. Our fearless leader, who's in the chat as the raging snowflake today, he goes after the NAFB, and which is the New International Fundamentalist Baptists, I believe. And there's some crazies over there. Like recently, sometime within the last 6 months, there was preachers from that sect out in public saying that the government should step in and execute gay people. You know, because that's what it says in the Bible. And
doesn't the Westboro Baptist Church do the same thing?
Right, the Westboro Baptist Church, that's another example, you know, where they were actually going out and picketing people's funerals, you know, and holding up signs like, you know, God hates gays and stuff like that, you know. So, yeah, there are certainly some extremists, even in the Christian religion, here in the United States, that doesn't necessarily manifest itself into some of the things that happen in Muslim countries, but you know, it could easily, like Fay says, there's portions of the government and laws where it infiltrates, and if we're not careful, we can.
I would argue that in the Muslim world, it's not even a conversation. The Muslim world is just saturated with Islamic laws and religiously motivated laws. There is a lot of work to be done there, and I really. Like I've searched my soul, but I really, really do not know how you can start anything there except from within, and like the people will have to rise up, and it will be a fucking massacre. It will be just horrifically violent when that happens. But we're seeing rising numbers of irreligiousness and atheism and agnosticism in that part of the world, and I think they will have, like they already had their Arab Spring, but that was more politically motivated. I really, really do fear the day where people will finally get sick of religion completely, and what sort of monster that will bring.
So, Malik.
Sorry, we went on a complete tangent.
No.
That's
completely fine. Wherever the conversation leads us, I'm always happy for that. And to comment on what you had said a few minutes ago. No, this show every week is about you also, Fay. I mean, you're the main draw.
I know.
The show.
We bring a guest. I would prefer that the guest gets a chance.
Right. Well, no, that's fine too. But the people aren't showing up to see me; they're showing up to see you. There's my self-deprecation of the day. So what I'd like to do now is kind of let Malik take a few moments and kind of wrap his story up, or wrap up anything he'd like to share with us, and just take the floor, Malik, and finish us off here.
Yeah, so I would say definitely looking more into like particularly Black and African American religious traditions is a interesting thing. Like I saw someone mention it in the chat about like Black Hebrew Israelites, of course the Nation of Islam, but then 5%ers and so on. So those are just some things that y'all should definitely look into. Really, really interesting, but not. I don't know if I would say it's interesting in a good way, but it's interesting to learn about and to see the impact that they did have on Black culture, even on Black music is pretty interesting, as well as just religion in general and its influence in music. But I mean, that's something I'm into personally. Mm-hmm. But I guess I'll wrap it up with follow me on Twitter, Malik Lendell.
Yeah, we will get that in the video description.
How do you pronounce your name, by the way? Is it Malik?
Yeah, I pronounce it Malik, but okay. I know like in Hindi is Malik, and then I know in Arabic it's
I wish I knew that. Otherwise, I wouldn't have said Malik. But please do follow Malik. He's got some amazing takes. Like his Twitter profile is one of the few that I really, really enjoy. Waiting for that next tweet. So please do follow him.
Yeah, absolutely. And Fay, do you have anything coming up that you need folks to know about?
Do I have anything coming up? I don't think so. I'm kind of taking I'm still riding off of my event fumes from yesterday, so I'm still feeling very, very good about myself. If you couldn't tell. But
and make sure and DM me the link to that.
I will.
I'll get that in the video description.
I'll get it for you. It was a really, really good discussion for anyone who's interested in LGBT rights or that kind of discussion. It was a really, really interesting discussion. And I do think that I prevented a lot of fights that could have broken out between the panelists. We had 8 panelists, and I did an amazing job. But, I mean, aside from that, I don't know if I have anything coming up. I'm kind of coming down from a lot of infighting and personal disputing in a public platform. So that's what I'm coming down from. But, you know, if you want to keep up with me, follow me on Twitter, and also check out my YouTube channel, Fay the Most Gracious.
Yep, and I haven't done it in the past few weeks when we first started. I'll make sure and get all those links in the video description as well for those of you folks who want to keep up with Fay. And I just want to take a minute and thank folks for stopping by. Junk Shop Library was here today, and we thank you for coming by. God equals the square root of -1. I love that name. Randall Rouser was here with us, and Baal's. Oh, well, I'm spelling it B-A. Yeah, I didn't get the. Well, we'll just say balls. And maybe I should pre-read these names before I say them. My brother from another mother, Maynard Saves, was here. Nayane, if I'm saying that right, my apologies if I'm not. And everybody else that showed. Iron Charioteer was here, and we appreciate you folks so much. A lot of you are here every week. Theo was here today as well, and we appreciate you coming by. If you get the chance, please share this podcast and this channel with other folks. And want to thank my guest, our guest Malik, for coming. Or Malik, I just learned that. You have to forgive me. For Malik for coming by. This was a great interview, and hopefully sometime in the future we could have him on again, or have him on another stream, you know, one of our discussion streams or something like that. But we're gonna get out of here for today, and just remember, and I will also put another link in this video description to our newly formed Discord channel. Yes, and I went in there the other day and created some additional channels in there, and I'm sure I gave Fay and Nakasuchi full run of the thing, and I'm sure they're going to go over there and create some channels. And
I'm going to say this based on an honor system, but if anyone wants to talk to me in there, just tag me, and I'll try and get into a voice chat. But I'm not available like 24/7. I am in the UK, so if you're calling me from Australia in the middle of the day, I will not be awake. Mm-hmm. But yeah, just tag me. I'm more than happy.
Are you Rotten Fire on?
No, I am Anger Spread Thin, I believe.
Anger Spread Thin. Yep, absolutely. Yep. Now that you said it, I remember that completely. So just remember, the Apostate Alliance is where you can be free to not believe.